Hey everyone, so today we're talking about the dark side of the criminal justice system. It's a series of videos, and today we're talking about specifically about the fact that or why trials are not fair, right? And there's a lot of reasons why trials are not fair for most people. There are exceptions, but we're going to talk about just some of these points for about specifics about why. Generally speaking, right, 90+% of people that go to trial they're at a disadvantage. They're at a huge disadvantage. So let's go ahead and get started, right? So first off, and I realize this could be offensive, right, to some public defenders, but generally speaking, right, this is something that's known in the industry. Some of the sharpest students, right, some of the sharpest attorneys end up at the prosecution's office, as opposed to ending up in the public defender's office. There are exceptions to that, right? On both sides, there's exceptions. But generally speaking, like, the best and the brightest either go into private industry or they go into the prosecution's office, because they're at the prosecution's office, they get to, there's a number of reasons, right? Morally or that it could be very beneficial to somebody who's sharp, who's ambitious, but also, and more importantly, there's an opportunity for them to climb up the ladder, right? And eventually go into office, whether it's to become, whatever political position, right? And they just climb up the ladder, right? It's a nice little resume builder, if you will. It's a leaping, it's a good position to leap from, to do all kinds of other things, right? You were a prosecutor, right? We revere prosecutors in our society. We respect them, generally speaking, right? And not by accident, right? We've been brainwashed into seeing things this way. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Just so you understand, I don't think there's anything wrong with respecting and revering prosecutors. But I think that there's some problems there, right? With the way that they're compensated, there's a problem with the way that their success is measured. And we can go into that some other time, or maybe even later in this video. But so anyways, my first point that I'm trying to make for why trials aren't fair is you will likely end up with a public defender, right? Most people end up with a public defender. So you're already going in, you don't have the best and the brightest, right? You have somebody that maybe was a C student, right? Didn't have the work ethic and was not as sharp. And I apologize, right, for those public defenders that do not fit that, that description. There are some that were sharp and they were ambitious, and then they had a different purpose, right? I've actually met some that could have easily gone and become prosecutors or gone into private industry, but maybe somebody in their family was mistreated by the criminal justice system, and they made it a purpose in their life, right, to become an attorney and to go make a difference, to have an impact. And my hat's off to you guys, right, that have done that. And hats off to those that are sharp and that are bright and that decided to become public defenders and do a good job, right? So this is not saying that 100% of the time this is true, but generally speaking, right, and you could just go into a courtroom and you'll see that, right? Generally speaking, prosecutors are very sharp. Like you could tell they were like probably graduated towards the top of their class. So my point is, going in, so you have that disadvantage, right? And the exception there obviously is if you're wealthy and you got the money to be able to pay for a top-notch, private defense attorney. Most people don't, right? Attorneys are very expensive, and that's a problem in itself, right? That needs to be resolved, I believe. Surprisingly, Utah has actually hit on something, and I think there's a number of states that have started this, and we'll have to go into this some other time, but what it is, they've opened up the industry to creative ways of practicing law, meaning like non-attorneys can own law firms, right? And paralegals can provide services that normally paralegals would not be allowed to. So, it's a good thing that's a good experiment that's been conducted here in Utah. It's gone well. They've done it for the last 3 years. So that definitely would help, right? But generally speaking, most people are not going to have the kind of money to pay for a good quality defense if they've been charged with something, right? So you're going into trial, right? Let's get back to the original conversation. You're going into trial. You're being defended by a public defender who's not necessarily going to be the cream of the crop. And on the other side, likely they are. That's one. But that's actually pretty small compared to some of the other reasons we're going to discuss right now. Let's talk about resources, right? So a prosecutor goes in and essentially they have unlimited resources, because even if they have a budget, right, quote unquote budget in-house, they can break that budget if they have to. They can request more money, right? This is the state, right? They can just take money from taxpayers and allocate more money and keep adding more money. And so in a way, they're going in with unlimited resources. If they need a crime scene reconstruction expert, for example, or they need a ballistic expert, or they need some kind of traumatic brain injury expert to come in, right? It's going to cost $18,000. They can do it. It's not a big deal. They can do it. What's 18,000 bucks for the state, right? On the other hand, for a public defender, it's tough, right? They have a budget. I've seen these contracts. They're allocated a set amount, right? They have to compete for the contract. They have a set amount that they're working with. And even though they're set up like nonprofits many times, they still have a profit and loss at the end of the year, right? Like they have to survive, right? So they can't just go spending money willy-nilly, because at some point, if they run out of money, what's gonna happen, right? They're out of business, right? Even if they're set up as a nonprofit, they still have to have a profit at the end of the line, at the end of the day, at the end of the year. They have to be able to pay for expenses. So their objective is to try to minimize your expenses as much as possible. So they're not going to necessarily go out there and spend $18,000 for an expert. They might, but it's rather unlikely, right? They typically are going to try to cut corners wherever they can. And if there's the same expert that they can hire for $3,000, right, and he's nowhere near as good or as qualified or doesn't have as deep of an understanding as you know, as the guy that wanted 18,000, they're gonna go with the guy that charges them 3,000 bucks, generally speaking, right? Because their budgets are tight, right? There's only so much money. Resources are a big deal, right? So going in a trial, if you know, I mean, if your defense attorney has, you know, just as an example, right, if they have a budget of $10, $15, $20,000 that they can spend on private investigators, experts, and so on and so forth, and the state has a budget that, you know, has no limit. There is no budget, right? They like to stay maybe under 50,000 or 100,000, but they can do whatever they got to do to make this happen, right? Your conviction is important to them, for even if you're innocent, right? So it's not that your conviction is important because you're guilty. You understand, when they go to trial, it's a big deal. And the reason it's a big deal is because 90+% of cases, right? And this is like nationwide, you know, I don't know what the exact number is in every single state, but nationwide, 90+% of cases get settled through a plea deal. So if that's the case, then what you have is you have prosecutors that don't take the cases to trial very often. So if they do have to take a case to trial, they're gonna win. They're gonna do everything possible to win. So anyways, let's go on to the next point. So another reason, right, why if you go to trial, you're at a disadvantage is because, generally speaking, right, if you're going to trial, you're gonna go ahead and select the jury, right? Jurors, they're part of society. They're ordinary people, right? They're ordinary people. And in society, we've been brainwashed, and you can use a different word to describe it if you want, socialized, whatever, to trust prosecutors. So generally speaking, when you're going to trial, people are already assuming, you know, if this prosecutor's taking this case to trial, you're probably guilty. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like going in, you're already at that, you know, at a disadvantage there, because just of the perception, right? The respect that we have for prosecutors and respect that we have for judges. So that's they're human beings, right? They're gonna have that in mind. They're gonna be thinking about that. So that's also another disadvantage that you'll have. Another thing is you have judges that, and this is known, right? Like in the criminal justice world, right? It's attorneys agree, right? Defense attorneys just generally agree. And it, by the way, and if you have any doubts about this, you can go, like, I don't know if you know this, but you can go to any trial, right? If there's a trial taking place, you can go to a trial and you can go ahead and witness what I'm about to tell you here yourself, right? You can witness this. Judges generally favor the prosecutors, right? And even if you don't understand the nuances of the law, like, you'll be able to see it in just their demeanor, right? And if you understand the law, you'll understand to a much greater degree just how much they're favoring the prosecution, right? And their rulings, right? When there's an objection, right? And guess who's watching this, right? Guess who's watching? Even if they don't understand all the nuances of the law, guess who's watching the judge favor the prosecution? Well, the jury. People are going to decide your guilt. And once again, right, we've been socialized to, you know, to trust and to believe and to have a deep respect for judges. And if that's the case, then if the jury's seeing that the judge is favoring the state, right? And I've been told this, right? I've shared with you guys in other videos. I've been told by many attorneys that that's just how it is. Judges favor the prosecution when it comes to criminal trials. Shouldn't be that way, right? They're supposed to be neutral, but that's not going to be the case, generally speaking, right? So, and it's crazy. It's one of those things that I witnessed it in my case, right? Where the judge would address, you know, the prosecution with so much respect. I mean, almost like, you know, like that's his best friend. Like, he trusts him, he likes him, and you know, how are you doing in front of the jury, right? Just talking to them as though they're buddies, and like just this deep, profound respect. And in fact, it's back and forth, right, between the prosecution and the judge. But then when they address, you know, the defense attorney, it's very cold, you know, Mr. whatever or Miss whatever, right? And it was just as a matter of fact, you know what I mean? I believe that has a major effect on the jury, and they're the ones that get this assigned. So another one is, and this one's huge. I mean, this one here, at some point we're gonna have to actually start, you know, I'll give you guys more examples. You know, I'll see if I can give you one or two right now. So when you go into trial, it's not like you think, right? You have all this evidence that favors you, and there's all this evidence that you can prove, right? That you think you can use to show that the other person, you know, I mean, like, so for example, let's start using, you know, my situation. So there was all this evidence, right, about the person that I ended up shooting, right? I ended up killing in self-defense. And I thought, well, you know, if I take all that evidence about who he was and everything he had done, take all this evidence about who I was and what I had been doing and why I did what I did, man, it should be obvious, right? The jury should easily acquit me, right? Like, there's no way they're gonna find me guilty of first-degree murder, right? There's just no way. That was my thought, right? Going in, my thinking. But it's crazy. It is crazy. So the evidence that's allowed in is completely up to the judge and you know what I mean? And the prosecutor gets to fight to keep stuff out, even if it's favorable, right? Which is one of the things that I've talked about before. And I think it's crazy that the prosecutors are allowed to do that, right? They should, like, it's not just about winning a conviction, a case for them, right? It should be about justice. Justice above all, right? Above all. But it's not that way, right? So they get to, if they, just so in my case, let's use this as an example. In my case, the guy that, you know, that I had the issue with, right, that I had the unfortunate tragedy, right, that took place, and the unfortunate incident that led to him losing his life. This gentleman was carrying around a gun in my venue, right? Like, he was a head security guard. And by the way, at the time, I didn't know this, but I later found out the dude had actually been deported multiple times, right? For all sorts of crimes. His boss, the head security guard, his boss was later arrested for doing some crazy stuff that actually related all back to my case. So 3 different things at least that I pointed out right there. None of that came into my trial. None of it. Part of it was the incompetence of my attorneys. Part of it was because the prosecution would not allow it in. It's not the way you think, right? And then there was all this favorable evidence about who I was and all that, and I thought I could get it all in. But there's all these rules about what can come in and what cannot come in, right? Some of it, you know, the prosecution will argue it's not relevant, or, you know, that, yeah, that's one of the main things, right? That is not relevant. So anyway, so as far as getting back to the original point, things are not what they seem. And as far as going to trial, when you go to trial, even if you have 10, 15, 20 pieces of evidence that you'd love to be able to present, right, to the jury because you think this will show your innocence, whatever your case is, right, just know that when you go to trial, you won't necessarily be able to get it all in. The prosecution will fight to keep it out, even if it's something that is pivotal to your case, right? It's like fundamental, like it doesn't matter. He's trying to win. And that's part of the problem. And the judge gets to decide, right? And if the judge, right, I was just talking about a minute ago, they favor the state, well, there's a pretty good likelihood that the prosecution is going to succeed in keeping that out, right? So now you're going to war, and you're going up an army, you know, that's got, you know, AR-15s and 30-06 and whatever, right? They have all these rifles and all these weapons. You have all that, but then the judge goes, no, you don't get to take a rifle. You can take your handgun. The state fights, you know, the prosecution fights even further and goes, no, maybe we don't let him take, you know, all the ammunition he's got. He gets 5 bullets and, you know, go ahead, good luck, right? Go to war with that. So it's crazy. So they can really, between the prosecution and the judge, and then this happens. This is just standard practice. You know, they're called motion in limines. They fight to keep evidence out, fight to keep evidence in, to bring evidence in. And some of that evidence that gets let in, it's speculative, right? And then there's cases, right? There's one right now that I'm helping an attorney out with, where the prosecution brought in evidence that should have never come in. That was not even relevant to the case, but it came in, right? They were allowed to bring it in, and it hurt him. It led to his conviction, and now he's convicted, and he's got a super high, you know, like I mean, he could spend the rest of his life in prison, you know? It's crazy. These are just a few points. There's more to it. I hope this was helpful. Some things have got to change. If you watch my content, you'll see some of the suggestions I have. They're not like pie in the sky. There's things that we can actually do to make the system better for all of us. Anyways, I hope that was helpful. I got to go get warm. I am freezing, and I'll see you guys in my next video. I'm not an attorney, and this is not legal advice.